For Genetics Family Conversation. We do these 4 months we spend on a topic, and the first month is a newsletter, the second month is a webinar, the third month is a mailer to our clinics, and the fourth month is this family conversation. And so we are doing that fourth month today on the topic area of variants of uncertain significance on March 18th, 2024. Just a reminder, we are funded by HRSA. The webinar is supported by HRSA and their grant to us, and we are very appreciative of their funding. If you're interested in more information about HRSA, you can visit hrsa.gov, hrsa.gov. I'm your host for today. I'm Christy, the projects manager for Mountain States Regional Genetics Network. We have Michaela joining us. She's our project coordinator. So feel free to message either one of us if you're having any technical difficulties or have any questions during the presentation. And this is our last and final family conversation and wrapping up our topic on variants of uncertain significance. So as some of you know, this has been part of an ongoing project that Mountain States has done over the last 4 years. We have recruited and had participate 28 different clinics across the Mountain States region. These are primary care clinics primarily, and you can see the pins on where they're located all across the Mountain States region. The Mountain States grant, if you have not heard yet, will be sunsetting on May 31st, 2024. And as I said, today's Family Perspective Activity webinar and will wrap us up for our activities for this initiative, this Time for Genetics initiative. All of this will be archived on our website, and we have gotten confirmation that our website will stay live for 2 years, so until 2026. However, it will become a static website, meaning that there will be no updates to it. And so all these things that we've put together for Time for Genetics, such as the webinars and these recordings, will be up there and available for you to access. There just will be no new updates going forward. But I just wanted to say to all of you, it's just been an honor and a pleasure to have you all take part in this initiative, taking 1 hour of your month to learn about genetics for your pediatric or primary care office. And we just appreciate you being part of this program. With that, it is my distinct pleasure to introduce Mariah and Jessica. Mariah comes to us from Nevada, and she is actually our genetic navigator for Nevada as another hat and role that she wears. So she's going to be sharing her story specifically around variants of uncertain significance for her family today. And Jessica is a dear friend I know here in Pennsylvania, and I looked far and wide for another family from our region, but when I wasn't able to find somebody, I knew Jessica's story would be really impactful as well, and so I reached out to her, and she graciously accepted my invitation to share her story as well today. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my slides and then just ask if Mariah would like to go first, and then Jessica can follow up, and then we always like to hold some time at the end for questions and conversation, but feel free if you have a question along the way, if you'd like to put it in the chat, just so you don't forget. I'll be keeping an eye on that as well. So with that, I'll stop and let's spotlight Mariah here so we can see her full screen. There you go, Mariah.
Thank you. First, I just want to thank Christy for doing this for all of the primary care providers. It's incredibly important work, and I'm very thankful that there are more primary care providers now that will know more about genetics and how important that can be in helping families get their appropriate care. And also thank you guys all for being willing to learn everything that you can. I know it's easier to refer patients to other providers, but especially in my state in Nevada, there aren't very many options for that. So thank you for all wanting to learn about this. I will give a brief background for my story with my family. So we have 3 kids. We have twins who are now almost 20 years old, and then we have a 16-year-old, all daughters. And when the twins, I had a normal twin pregnancy. When they were born, they had quite a few complications. Everything was chalked up to them being born early. They were born 6.5 weeks early, which isn't unusual for twins. We went through lots of different specialists, ruling out other issues. They had a lot of feeding difficulties and a lot of developmental delays, all of which were just chalked up to them being early. As they got a little bit older, the discrepancies between what is quote unquote normal versus what they were doing started getting larger. When solid foods were introduced, we saw quite a few problems with more vomiting, more GI problems, more failure to thrive, despite me being on an elimination diet while nursing, just lots of issues. We went through multiple doctors trying to figure out what was wrong, and we landed on one diagnosis that they thought, okay, this is what's wrong. It was an eosinophilic esophagitis diagnosis. They started the treatment for that. Stuff did not improve. We went back to the GI doctor. We traveled around the country trying to find doctors who specialized in everything. This was all under, we had two different pediatricians because we lived in Southern Nevada and then we moved to Northern Nevada. So we've really only been with two different pediatricians. They've been incredible in helping us get the appropriate care. Our current pediatrician has been with us for 17 and a half years now. She's fantastic. And we have gone through just about every specialist you can get. My kids landed through a second diagnosis of mitochondrial disease, and it was a loose diagnosis because they hadn't had the muscle biopsy done yet. They hadn't had genetic testing done yet. It was based on clinical symptoms. They went and had genetic testing done, not genetic, they had muscle biopsies done. And during the time that we were waiting for the muscle biopsies testing to come back, I ended up pregnant with the third child. And the test results came back shortly after I found out I was pregnant as being positive for mitochondrial disease, and not very much information was given to us. The GI doctor was the one who had initially investigated everything. It was kind of scary, the stuff he was telling us, and we were given basically no direction on what to do next. So we went through finding more and more information on our own. We went back and forth with the pediatrician's help, trying to get more specialists involved. We did end up getting a lot of genetic testing done. We've, I think, to date had like 4 different rounds of genetic testing done. They found a variant of, they didn't know what it meant. The doctor, they initially said that it didn't mean anything. And then the more that we have done with genetic testing and finding geneticists who specialize in mitochondrial disease, they think that maybe that's what is causing the symptoms. But still, we get asked all the time, okay, so they have mitochondrial disease, which one? Which one do they have? And I always have to say, we don't know. It's an umbrella diagnosis, and we don't know. And on top of that, they have symptoms of other disorders that don't fit in a nice, neat little box. So as primary care providers, I think probably the most important thing that you can do with your patients that have complicated issues going on is just try to listen to all the things going on, find the specialist when you can, and be a single spot where the parents and families can go for all the help that they need. And the thing I've appreciated the most about our pediatrician is even if she doesn't specialize in whatever symptom we're having trouble with, she's been willing to help us get the right care, whether it's transferring a prescription to Nevada because my kids have Medicaid as a secondary and they require a Nevada doctor to sign off on it, or if it's getting us into a specialist. And so it's helping write those letters for medical necessity, getting insurance to approve things. It's been incredibly stressful as a parent, just watching all of the things that your kids struggle with and deal with, and then trying to balance them having a normal life and knowing that your pediatricians or primary care providers are there to support you is huge, because I go to those pediatrician appointments relaxed instead of stressed out. And when you go to doctor's appointments, and as a parent, if you go into those stressed out and nervous, you forget half the things you're there to talk about. So building that relationship with those patients that have a little more complex cases goes a long ways. I also appreciate that our doctor tends to, and it might be an agreement she has with her front office, but we tend to get either the spot at the end of the day or the spot right before lunch where she's not popping in for 5 minutes and running out. She often will sit down and take the time that it needs. And I know that can get tricky with billing. And I know that there are ways to bill for a complex care visit. So whatever providers can do to help those families with the more complex cases, I think would be really helpful. So,
Thank you so much,
yeah.
Mariah. Did you want him to say anything specifically about just receiving those VUS results? Did you know what variant of a certain significance was before you did
No,
genetic testing?
no, I didn't even understand. I thought that anything that you did in newborn screening type of things, I thought the first round of genetic testing we did would show everything. And I thought, around that time, the 23andMe types of testing became available to the public. I thought that those kinds of things would show everything and everything would be easy to explain. You would have all your answers answered, all your questions answered. I did not realize until we were on to our third geneticist that when you do genetic testing, I did not realize the complexity involved with genetic testing and how, as a provider, you actually are able to pick out symptoms that then the lab can assign certain things they're looking for. So it's easy to miss things. And when the variant of uncertain significance came back, at first it was glossed over. It was like, oh, don't worry about that. That doesn't mean anything. And so I'm like, okay, but it shows up in me and three of our kids, but not my husband. So, and it's also linked to the mitochondrial stuff. So I'm in my head, I'm like, doesn't that mean something? And the doctor's like, no, we don't know what it means. So it doesn't mean anything. So that was the first response. And it made me, so I asked him, I said, so does that mean that you're taking away the mitochondrial disease diagnosis? And he said, no, I'm not at all. And I was like, but I'm confused then because that you just said it didn't matter, but that's the one that shows up on the mitochondrial DNA type, that's what it is. And he's like, no, we don't know anything about it. So it can't be that one. But then as the years have gone on, we had one geneticist who is thinking more that now that might be part of the problem, but it's still classified as a variant of uncertain significance. So it left me questioning everything, and I still question everything. Every single symptom my kids have, I'm like, am I making this up? Am I seeing this? And I've even asked the doctors, I'm like, am I crazy? And they're like, no, like these are real symptoms that are happening. They'll show me the test results. They'll show me blood work. They've talked about the muscle biopsies. They're like, these are all real things. It's just, we don't have a fancy name that we can assign to your kids' disorders. And that is really, really challenging as a parent. And every time my kids go to the ER, every time they go to the hospital, every time they go to a new doctor, I feel like I have to explain everything again. I have to come in with, piles of paperwork showing all of their proof, that this is what other doctors have said. So it's hard. It's exhausting. Like
I
it's
was just
incredible. It's emotionally exhausting.
I was just gonna say exhausting seems like the right word for it
Yeah.
because it's
Yeah.
it's never ending
Yeah.
either.
Like my
Yeah.
brain and my heart are tired. We've been doing this since my kids were, we first started seeing like real problems that could kind of be genetic type things when the girls were close to 1.5 years old or so, is about that time. And they're almost 20. So that's a long time to be struggling with that as a parent. It just is. It's a long time.
And maybe we can wrap back around to it after Jessica shares her story. But something that I know you guys have in common is having to travel very long distances for care. And I know that part can be equally exhausting because it's not just getting in the car and going around the block. So
No.
we might be able to talk about that here in a bit. But I want to give Jessica a chance. But thank you so much, Mariah, for sharing your story. And we'll see if we'll have some questions here at the end then for both of you. So thanks for sharing.
Thank you.
I'm gonna stop spotlighting you and then ask Jessica if you're ready. I'll make you the spotlight so everybody can see you. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to thank everyone for this opportunity also. I hope, sometimes I get a little nervous to share our story because I do get a little emotional talking about it because we're still kind of right in the middle of ours. But I just hope that if this could help one patient of yours or another family to save them a little bit of time or stress, I'm happy to share. I have 2 children, and my son is now 11 and my daughter is 8. And our journey kind of started completely normal. I didn't know much about genetics before this. I did have a friend in high school that had cystic fibrosis. And that was basically the only thing I really truly knew about genetics, was basically that she had this condition and all her sisters were affected by it, and it skipped the boys, just the girls. And, unfortunately it was terrible. So I kind of thought that's what all genetic disorders were like. I didn't realize there was sort of umbrella terms. There's a spectrum of them also. I had no idea. So I guess sort of starting at prenatal care is when they do the genetic testing for cystic fibrosis to see if you're carriers. That was kind of my first even thought of genetically something maybe possibly being wrong. But once that test came back fine for my husband and I never gave it another thought again. As far as like newborn screening, I don't remember if anyone in the hospital told me if we passed or not. I'm assuming because we went home, we were good to go. I know that they got the test done, but I don't think at the time didn't even know how many disorders that they test for. Yes, honey, sorry. But everything was fine with my pregnancy. Everything was normal. And then at one point when my son was around 15 months, he had a big regression. And that kind of led us with our pediatrician with a bunch of talks, different things, different specialists. We ended up at a developmental pediatrician who ended up kind of doing more of like nutritional labs and things. And that's kind of what led us to genetics. Our pediatrician ran a very simple panel for one mutation, a genetic mutation that is very common for most of the population. And when both of my kids tested positive for that, he sent us to genetics. So at the time, my son was around 15 months and my daughter was just born. And the day before, they canceled our genetic appointment for my daughter. And I thought we were being proactive by having her since my son was having some issues. And they basically said, unless she has some sort of problem, there's no reason to see her. At the time, my son had some markers that were very low, some that were high. So he was showing some like metabolic, just some different things in his labs, where that's what ended us up at genetics also, was just to see, is there something that we can do about this? Should he be on a supplementation for the ones that are low? Like, how can we help him? Because after he had a regression with language, eye contact, words, the word comes up of just autism, and every other medical issue that he was experiencing was kind of brushed off to the side. So he had low weight at the time. He had feeding issues, the failure to thrive. He had hypotonia. He was having reoccurring ear infections. He had just energy issues where we couldn't wake him up when he was napping. Just that didn't seem normal because they didn't happen until after the regression. So we ended up at our genetics, a local hospital around here. And basically they told us that he didn't need any supplementation and he was good to go. And it didn't seem right to us and it didn't seem right to our pediatrician. And they offered for us to get a second opinion. They thought that we should. They asked if we were willing to travel. And of course we were. At that point. We were just looking for answers in some way to help him. He was not sleeping, having trouble eating, having trouble going to the bathroom. So we do appreciate how much our pediatrician did help us at the beginning, because if it wasn't for them even putting the thought in our brain to get a second opinion, I'm not sure if we would have done it. There was a coordinator in the office and she called around and she got us in a neighboring state. And so a few months later we traveled, and as soon as we walked in, the doctor was like, okay, well, let's try this supplement for this amino acid that he's low on. And I just didn't understand why it was so easy for this genetic doctor to tell us, yeah, let's try it, and why we had to travel all that way. Why couldn't our doctor here? Like, why couldn't they do it? Why did we have to go there? But after my son started the amino acid, his life just significantly improved. It got so much better. A lot of the symptoms that we were seeing, they started kind of improving. Some speech started coming back. We started seeing less of a regression. He would have some words, lose words again, have words, lose them. And after he started this, it stopped. He kept all his words. So he also never jumped prior to this, and he started jumping. So when we were there, they did some more genetic testing. And then basically, it's like, okay, we'll call you when the results are in. And then you're kind of just left. It's like, okay, well, what do we do in the meantime? But you just wait months, and every night you go to sleep and you have no idea if, something's going to come back, if you're going to get an answer, if you don't want to get an answer. And you're very conflicted because you don't ever want something to be wrong with your child. You don't want to get a diagnosis by any means. But also when you know that something's not right, not having that answer is just, it's heartbreaking, because what more can you do without an answer from them? But at the time, everything came back, quote unquote, normal. And that's when we really started looking into finding a specialist who specialized in what our son's condition was and what sort of like the metabolic part to it. And our pediatrician did help us find someone to give us a referral, and which took us across the country to find a neurologist that could hopefully help us just in treatment and just his overall care. And around that time, my daughter kind of went in an opposite direction with some abnormal movements of her whole left side of the body. Motor skills was not on my list of things that I was worried about her for. I was more worried about, the loss of language and eye contact and different things. So we ended up, the first thing I said, was we need to check her amino acids, because this is what my son has. And basically at the neighboring hospital that we were at, they told us that my son's levels weren't that low. But even though they weren't that low, that literally changed his life. So when she got her amino acids checked, sure enough, she had the exact same issue that he was having, except hers were much lower than his, to a point that she was basically considered in a metabolic crisis, where we had to get right in with genetics and right in with cardiology just to make sure that everything was fine. And thankfully it was. But unless someone would have written that script to just simply check her amino acids, I mean, I don't know how much longer that would have gone by. And that was also a developmental pediatrician who was willing to check those for us. And once that came back, when we went to the neurologist, she said, well, how did you know to check that? And that's what we said. We were like, our son, like, it's family history. I mean, it's my husband and I and our 2 kids. Like, of course we want to check theirs. I wish they would check ours. And so we've been on this route a little bit, but I ended up taking both of my kids, obviously, to see the neurologist across the country. And when we went there, we had a great appointment, and he was like, okay, we're going to run some genetic testing. And I didn't even know a neurologist could do that. And he came in, and it was an easy cheek swab. It wasn't some invasive blood test. It was the easiest test. All they had to do was, just a cheek swab. And I didn't have to get pre-approval from the insurance. I didn't have to fight with the insurance for 2 months prior. It was the most stress-free appointment ever. And it was just so nice that we didn't have to put him through, the invasive testing that you have to do with some of these things, like the muscle biopsies and different things. So I was just so grateful that we could do something like that, or there was a test like that. No one's ever mentioned that to us before. My son did come back with a few rare variants that basically at this time they say means nothing, but it could in the future. And then he did have another, variable of unknown significance gene come up, and it said that the way that his is expressed is unique from the way anyone else's is. And at this time, it doesn't mean anything. But to us, we're like, well, wouldn't you want to look into that a little bit more if his is, not expressed in a way like anyone else? Like, wouldn't that be something interesting? But it kind of was left at that. But thankfully, his neurologist is still treating off his lab work in different clinical testing. So, just like you would go into a doctor, and if your vitamin D is low, they're going to give you vitamin D. That's kind of the way that his doctor does things, and we're grateful for that. My daughter also has seen genetics. She got some genetic testing done from this neurologist also. And right now we're at a point where she also had this variable of unknown significance show up. And they said that basically it doesn't mean anything. But in the symptoms of her variant that was found, it's related back to movement disorders. And it's in this mitochondrial family where it would explain why her amino acids were so low at one point. So it's the only answer that we have found that made somewhat sense. She has had every test done that the neurologist wanted to do, MRIs, lumbar puncture, and nothing has been found, no answer. So right now we're kind of just throwing medication out there and hoping that it's going to go away. But now that we have this variant that we found, it's actually leading our neurologists to hopefully look at how they're treating other people with this variant. And maybe that's something that we could decide for her in the future. So right now, both of my kids' labs are basically getting ran again. And we're just hoping for some sort of answer and, basically a treatment path. But if it wasn't for our pediatricians, just kind of knowing and giving us that nudge to get a second opinion and to let us know it's okay to get in a second opinion. And there's certain labs that they can run for us before we see certain doctors. So that way we already have the answers going forward. That way the neurologist can just look at the labs and be like, oh, okay. It's been helpful, but it definitely takes a team. And it takes a lot of work, and it takes a lot of phone calls and emails. But as long as, you know, everyone's working together and just trying to get to the bottom of it, then I mean, I guess that's all we can do together. But yeah, we're thankful for having a good pediatrician also, but that's where it starts. I never knew that we would end up at genetics. I never thought about going into genetics. I didn't know that a child that was showing symptoms to fall under the spectrum of autism could even qualify for genetic testing. But I will say that seeing how my son was treated versus my daughter for something with like a regression in words, if I quit talking today, I would have every test done under the sun. But with her, since she is able to speak and, you know, kind of tell them what's going on, she was taken much more seriously than he was. And the genetic testing that she got right away, we had to wait years to get for my son. So I do try, if one thing comes out of this is I hope that you will remember that just the children that are falling under these developmental delays and autism and different, you know, disorders that are related to those, I hope that someone will look into their condition further and just not just automatically assume just because you stop talking at 15 months, it's autism. Yes, it absolutely could be, but it also could be something else much more going on and that you can treat to improve their way of life. So
I was going to say, this particular emphasis on treatable, because I know that was so impactful for your situation. Do you want to give an update on your son today? I mean, he's doing great speaking. I know. He's able to communicate.
He's doing great, and I mean, there hasn't been anything crazy that we have done. It's just kind of been, okay, here's your blood work. You know, you're low on this, you're high on this, like, let's even it out. And just from there, you know, he was able to gain weight. His GI issues have completely went away. And in that in itself, because now he's sleeping, now he can attend a class in therapy and he can do more things. You know, before it was just really, really scary times and you just feel very hopeless. But everything that's what we really, really like about his neurologist is that there's a black and white reason for why he's doing everything. And that as parents makes us feel so much better that we have evidence and proof of why we need to do this. And we're not putting him through any unnecessary testing or giving him anything, you know, medication that he doesn't need. You know, every couple months, he's still getting blood work and different testing done, urine, easy stuff, you know, that just continues to improve his overall health.
Thanks so much for sharing, Jessica. I really appreciate it. And thanks for sharing the piece about the variant of uncertain significance as well. And your wherewithal about genetics, right? That it's much different than what you first knew about. So with cystic fibrosis with your friend, it is quite a wider spectrum of what can come back on tests versus I always say, I think we all go into genetic testing thinking it's like a test for diabetes and it's going to be a yes or no answer. Do you have diabetes or do you not have diabetes? And I don't think it could be further from a test like that, right? Where there's a lot of unknowns. So all right. Well, I know we have Kathy and Osana joining us, so I would just love to open the floor and just see if they have any questions first for you ladies. Thank you so much for sharing your family's stories. And then if they don't, I have some more follow-ups for you. But Osana and Kathy, I just want to give you the floor if you have any questions you'd like to ask.
No, first, thank you so much for sharing your experience. Because we have seen, you know, several cases when we have received, we have been tracking the results from microarrays, and then we see these variants of unknown significance. And sometimes as you have described. I mean, they said we don't have a name for this, but it matches completely, the phenotype of the patient, the symptoms and signs, like, associated with developmental delays or visual differences and, sensory challenges. So it is, it's always important to take this into consideration, not because of it's reported like benign, like a non-pathologic variant, to keep an eye on it and to do a follow-up and to have a full genetic evaluation, because I have seen also, all of these tests ordered by different subspecialties, not genetics, or neurologists or primary cares, and then the interpretation is tricky. So when we recommend genetic testing, we said, well, the American Academy of Pediatrics recommend to do this evaluation because, genetic conditions associated with, I don't know, the diagnosis of autism or developmental delays. And then we have the question, can the pediatrician order the test? The answer is yes, after going through all of this paperwork with prior authorization, but the problem is not that one. The difficulties can start in doing the interpretation of the results. And it doesn't mean that they cannot still be ordered by primary cares. It's just to acknowledge, to evaluate or to discuss these results with genetics. It's going to save time for sure if the pediatrician can order it, because for genetics here, I mean, we have a waiting list. So for sure can save time, but the interpretation, is worth it to discuss it with the geneticists, unless there's something like, even in the setting of like, this is all negative, what about if being this negative, it means that you need further workup? So I think with all of this progress that we have made in genetics nowadays, I think it's worth it at the end to have the eyes on a specialist, on geneticists, clinical geneticists, on the patients that we refer.
Thanks for that perspective, Asana. And I think of that almost as like a double hill to overcome, right? You said like the overcoming, trying to just get the tests ordered, right? And all that takes to the pre-authorization, and how big of a lift that is for primary care offices oftentimes, because if you've never done it before, you're not set up on all those portals and things. And then, like you said, then the test comes back. Once you get over the first hump, the test comes back. And if there are variants of uncertain significance, then it's the interpretation hump of, okay, now what do I do with it? Now,
exactly.
what's next? And so, yeah, reaching out. The other thing that I know is really strong in our region is a lot of our clinical geneticists will peer-to-peer consult, right? Through I think in New Mexico, there's a line, I forget what the line is called, but Colorado has one. They have a tips line or something like that, where you can call in as a provider and get connected with a specialist, so you can do peer-to-peer, at least to get some guidance, right, on maybe what next steps would be and if a referral is appropriate. And the other thing I wanted to mention too, I know this was a module we did quite a couple way back in the beginning of this program, but we did do the developmental delay module, and we do have a developmental delay algorithm. And I just want to point back to that, because I think it's important in Jessica's story, in that one of the tests that her son had done was plasma amino acids, I believe, Jess, that pointed to some of these biochemical markers that are not genetic and might not show up on a genetic test. And that's part of the tier 3 of the developmental delay algorithm, are lab tests that pediatricians can order as well, because sometimes those show things that are actionable as well. So thanks for your commentary though, Asana, and thanks for being here. Kathy, did you have any questions?
No questions, just a comment. I think you guys have really done a great job, and a lot of this is really ferreting things out and trying to figure out what's next, and just being a persistent parent, even if you think you're bothering people or stuff, is so, so helpful. And it encourages the pediatricians to go on as well. And also just being there for people in your community, often offering that you would be like a resource just to talk to other parents, even if their kids have other stuff. I've found through this group how strong a group these parents are, and how helpful they can be to each other. And one of the things I know as a pediatrician, when I trained, there were a few things we were finding genetically testing, but that was, a million years ago. And now it's changing all the time. So some pediatricians may know, where to go next, others don't. And some of it is just encouraging, to try to connect with the genetics in your area, because like we do have hotlines like in Montana, because people are so spread out, but that you can contact and find out what does this mean? What can I do next, as a pediatrician to help these families? But I think you've done a wonderful job. And I think this just come a long way. And I think it's a test to what this Mountain States, genetics network has done through the years. And I don't think we'd be here if it wasn't for that. And I'm kind of sad that it's winding down. But good luck to both of you.
Thank you, Kathy, for sharing that. And Kathy and I go way back. Like when I was a new mom at the Mountain States events, Kathy was there. So I appreciate your long-term commitment to helping families, Kathy, too, in the Mountain States region. So. All right. Well, I have a question for Jess and Mariah, if you guys would like to answer it, because this is the one that we often get from our Time for Genetics participants, and maybe Kathy and Osana are thinking it too. But what would be your biggest piece of advice for pediatricians or primary care doctors that are working with families who say they get over that first hurdle of ordering the test and they do get it back a variant of uncertain significance with the family? What would be your biggest piece of advice for them in either talking with the family about that or walking with the family through what's next? Either one of you want to answer?
I will. I would just say that the biggest piece of advice is to explain to a family what that means, that it doesn't mean that there's not something going on, that the biggest thing that's been helpful to me is validating for a doctor to validate my concerns, to validate that all the concerns that I have are actually concerns, and to help point me in the right direction. So whether that's trying to get in with a GI doctor who understands this specific symptom, because if you're already lined up to see a geneticist who might be able to explain it more, you're still going to potentially need other specialists to help with the symptoms that go along with whatever that diagnosis might be, or the non-diagnosis, the issues that are going on. So I feel like validating what's going on, reassuring that it doesn't mean that they're not done looking. It doesn't mean, because the testing keeps evolving, like just because they didn't find the exact answer doesn't mean that this is it. Like, you're done figuring it out. And it doesn't mean that couldn't end up being the answer as more research is done on that. So that'd be my biggest piece of advice.
Yeah, thank you. That's great advice. Thanks, Mariah. How about you, Jess? Would you add anything to that or like to give your own piece of advice?
No, I agree with everything that Mariah said. I think, just validating those concerns, just understand that it takes a lot sometimes to even bring your concerns up to your pediatrician, because you don't want to seem, too overly anxious. And if, it takes a little bit of maybe, a search or calling to a hospital or a genetic doctor and seeing if they have any information on that variant, or if there is any foundation or any information that you can give, because if the parent has to look that up themselves, it's often very overwhelming. So even if you could just give, or another family, and if they would be interested in talking, like, hey, here's this number, they're kind of in the same situation, because that's what we've really found along the way, is a lot of the information and help that we got came from other families in similar situations that were willing to share that with us. So I don't know if you can make, I'm not saying a support group or some sort of little community in your practice, but you know, just knowing that you're not alone and having some sort of support, and just knowing that your doctor is going to walk you through it, like they were saying, it's huge. It's just very, very helpful, and you feel less alone. So
Yeah, and I think I've heard great advice from our Montana genetic navigator around the HIPAA issues, is just asking each family, hey, you know, do I have your permission to share your information, or can I share, and swapping numbers, literally just getting permission from both of them, and sharing each other's contact, and then leaving it up to the family to contact, you know, the other family. So maybe removes the primary care doctor from that equation, but it also gives, like you said, Jessica, a way to connect, and a way to find others, even if it's not the same VUS, which would be unbelievable if it was the same VUS, but even just somebody else going through genetic testing, right, can sometimes be enough to make you feel like you're not alone. The other thing I was going to I just put in the chat here, is I just wanted to remind all of our providers that we do have a VUS video that Mountain States made as part of this grant cycle. And I just wanted to follow up and ask this question kind of in relation to this video. I think both of you have kind of shared it in your stories a bit, but when you were giving informed consent for genetic testing, were you specifically informed, I guess, that a variant of uncertain significance was a possible outcome? Because I think we've heard from a lot of our family provider and primary care provider colleagues that giving informed consent for genetic testing is a whole different beast unto itself, right? That it's not the same informed consent that you have to give for other testing. And so maybe just asking, is that something that would have been helpful if you didn't have that awareness going into the testing? Would that have been helpful at all?
I'll go. I was not told about a variant of uncertain significance possibly coming back. I was told that this test would give you an answer, and I believed that it would have been helpful. Once it came back, I was told that, you know, oh, by the way, when you do testing to find mitochondrial disorders, actually only 30% of them have actual names assigned to them. But it took, you know, more conversations after that. So yeah, it would have been helpful to know that.
Thanks for sharing, Mariah. How about you, Jess?
yeah, the first time we were not told, we weren't told much, to be honest. The second time around, since my son did have one show up, we sort of knew. I wouldn't say that we were experts by any means, but we kind of had an idea. I feel like the second time around, things were explained much better, but they didn't go into detail. The only thing is, you know, even the second time around, when this variant of unknown significance came back, it basically said, this shouldn't cause a problem, meaning like, okay, like this probably means nothing, but sometimes these things are complicated. And then you're just kind of left. And it's like, okay, well, now what, you know? And I think sometimes too, like I worry, you know, sometimes when you get the genetic testing done, they can, you know, reevaluate it. And that's kind of where we're at. But after it's reevaluated, if nothing else comes of an answer, then what? You know, like where are you left years from now? And no one's really given us that answer yet. I'm sure we'll obviously find out as we go, but there's just more questions come up getting an answer like that than anything. So
Thanks for sharing that. Thanks for both of you for clarifying. So it sounds like maybe giving families an awareness before testing begins that this might be a possibility, might even just be helpful, just in knowing, maybe lessening the shock if it comes back, just knowing it's a possibility. Yeah. All right. Does anyone else have any other questions? Michaela, did you have any questions for our guests?
No, I don't have any questions. Thank you both for sharing them.
Yeah, thank you guys so much. I'll just end on one. We have a couple minutes left. I just wanted to go back and revisit the travel piece of it because I think it's something that both of you have had extensive journeys with, lots of miles, lots of frequent flyer miles and car miles. So do you want to talk to that about just, being in places? I'll maybe compare and contrast Mariah and Jessica's situation. Jess, you're in Pennsylvania where there's lots of geneticists. Mariah, you're in Nevada where there's not, I think maybe one geneticist in the whole state. So, but you've both had similar journeys in that you've had to travel to find care. So do you want to just comment on what that's been like for your family and how you've managed that and what that's looked like?
Sure. It's been very challenging. We have traveled from Nevada to Ohio. We've traveled to different parts of Ohio. We've traveled to Texas. We've traveled to different parts of California. We, due to the other issues related to the genetic stuff, it involves lots of complicated GI issues. And we have had to seek out GI doctors who are very, very well versed in TPN, which is not something that the local GI doctor, we've been told, doesn't have a ton of experience with that. So we've had to travel to Cincinnati Children's Hospital, and that, having, at one point I had 2 kids on TPN for about 6 of those years. My 16-year-old has been on TPN since she was 20 months old. And that requires going back to Cincinnati Children's Hospital many times a year. When things were complicated, we were flying back there a lot. And I was flying back there sometimes with just Taylor, sometimes with all 3 kids. Usually with my husband, he was able to get the time off work, but it was not easy at all. And a ton of stress on the family, a ton of stress on family finances. I was a teacher and had to quit to stay home and take care of the kids because I was using up too much sick leave. So it's, it puts a massive amount of strain on the family in every possible way. And now that my 2 kids are older and becoming sort of independent, one of them is, the other not as much. It's like, and then I'm needing to find a job for other reasons. And it's hard because I've had all this time without a job. So it's complicated. Like, medical stuff is very complicated, and it impacts families in a lot of ways that people generally don't understand. So yeah, the travel's hard. And it's hard because I'll go to the local hospitals and I feel like the local places often don't understand the complexities of some of this care that's involved. And like, one time I went to the ER and I was having to do it's like Taylor's line broke. And so we had been trained on how to repair her line, but we have to do it in a hospital for safety reasons. So I had the attending ER doctor and some of the nurses, they all wanted to come watch just because they've never seen one done. I'm like, that made me feel so nervous. Like, I am not a doctor. I am not a surgeon. And I am just praying that nothing goes wrong because, and I'm shaking. I'm like, please let me do this well. And it's just, it's hard. It's really hard. Whereas I actually flew across the country to Cincinnati one time when Taylor's line broke. I paid for a plane ticket, like right then, to get to Cincinnati. My mom actually paid for it. I don't have those resources. And went to the ER. They repaired her line. It was beautiful. We flew back home. And I'm like, I wish I had access to that, but I did not. So yeah, it's hard.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that story, Mariah. I cannot imagine the stress
Yeah.
of having to do that medical procedure without ever being trained really as a medical professional to do it. So but you have your MD degree as the mom degree, right? I call it.
Yeah, right.
I do have a question for you. Any of that travel, was that travel ever covered by any of your insurances?
No.
Okay. I figured as much, but I thought I would ask. Yeah. How about you, Jess? Do you want to comment on the travel that your family has endured, continues to endure?
Like 2 years ago was the first time we actually went on a little vacation because all our vacation time that I also stay home with the kids, just because that's what needed to be done. So, my husband only gets so much time off work, and typically we're using that to travel for a doctor or medical appointment. And, at the time, my son plane wasn't an option. So we drove from Pennsylvania to Arizona, and, but nothing can put a price on, obviously, your child's health, but also seeing a specialist that you just specializes in your child's condition, that understands that you don't have to go in and kind of explain things to you. You can just get right down to it. And, so unfortunately, we know that we're always more than likely going to have to travel to get the best care for him, and possibly her too. So that's kind of where we're at now, is just wherever we have to go, like we'll make it happen. So
thanks for sharing that. All right, we're at the top of the hour. Thank you guys again so much for being so transparent. And I know these are your personal journeys, and this is sometimes not easy to talk about. But we thank you for sharing the details today, so that our primary care providers and pediatricians can help others further behind us on the journey. So thanks again for being here today. And thank you, Asana and Kathy, for being here, and Michaela. We really appreciate your time. And we'll look forward to sharing this recording out to the ones that couldn't be here because they're in clinic taking care of folks right now. So thanks again, everyone.
you.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
yeah.
Bye.